Unfazed by violence, tens of thousands of Iraqis stayed on the streets in anti-government protests. 2 more people were killed by security forces as unrest swept over Baghdad. As Syria's warring factions try to put an end to the country's civil war in Geneva, new clashes break out in the northeast between Syrian and Turkish forces. And U.S. House Democrats close in on a key vote on the impeachment process against President Donald Trump, as more people close to the president are called in to testify. Hello and welcome back to the France 24 Newsroom. I'm Anka Ole. Thank you for joining us again. Protesters have been on the streets in Iraq for a week now in a second round of anti-government protests this month. Angry over inequality, corruption, and poverty, they're demanding deep political changes. And they're unswayed by the violence that's killed at least 240 people so far and injured thousands more. Now the political alliance around Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi looks like it's beginning to fracture, and protesters are waiting to see if their anger has finally borne fruit. Luke Schrago has more.
Iraq's protests have grown to their largest yet, tens of thousands strong. And there are those who are doing their best to support the crowds, including with makeshift medical stations like this one, on the margins of the often deadly demonstrations against corruption, poverty and unemployment.
We gathered in this tent to treat protesters affected by tear gas. There are lots of people coming together to donate different types of medicine. They come to us every day, asking about our needs for medicine.
Since public anger first boiled over at the beginning of the month, well over 200 people have died in violence nationwide, with thousands more wounded. A year into his mandate, Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi has struggled to rein in the public's fury, offering concessions like a cabinet reshuffle and promising to address grievances. However, for a generation that's known nothing but foreign occupation and extremist violence now coming of age, Abdul Mahdi's words ring beyond hollow.
Iraqis refused the conference of political blocs in the Green Zone because they both failed for 17 years to build the national project that serves the Iraqi people and failed to build any national identity. All they did was succeed in stealing money from the poor and the Iraqi people.
Protesters may well get what they want. The political alliances that brought Abdul Mahdi to power have shown signs of fracturing, with the international community calling for dialogue in recent days.
Staying in the Middle East, the Pentagon has released the first images from last weekend's commando raid in Syria, which led to the death of Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The grainy black and white aerial videos from Saturday's raid showed U.S. Special Operations Forces closing in on the compound and U.S. aircraft firing on militants nearby. Some of the most impressive footage showing smoke rising from the ground after U.S. military bombs completely leveled Baghdadi's compound. Syrian state media has reported new clashes in northeastern Syria between Turkish and Syrian forces, illustrating just how fragile a peace deal is in the wake of Turkey's offensive against Syria's Kurds. Turkey vows it can relaunch that offensive anytime, while Syria's government has condemned what it calls an occupation of Syrian land. Mario Sofos has more.
These civilians are fleeing their village in northeastern Syria in the middle of the night. They fear getting caught up in ongoing fighting. Violent clashes have been happening in the region since Tuesday. Troops arrived at a village close by. Everyone began to flee. We can't stay here any longer. Damascus has accused Turkish forces and its Syrian proxies of continuing their advance and taking control of villages located near Tal Tamer. Information that has not been confirmed by Ankara. The villages are situated at the edge of the safe zone implemented by Turkey in northern Syria, territory that Kurdish forces are supposed to have evacuated under the deal Ankara made with Moscow. On Wednesday, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan threatened to continue his military operations if Kurdish troops, whom Ankara consider to be terrorists, do not respect the safe zone agreement.
If we see that members of the terrorist organization have not been evacuated from the 30-kilometer area, or if attacks continue from anywhere, we retain the right to conduct our own operation.
The Syrian army continues to deploy reinforcements along the border. The situation is fueling fears that new clashes could break out between Syria and Turkey, which is a member of NATO.
Well, meanwhile, France's National Assembly has unanimously adopted a non-binding resolution condemning the Turkish offensive in northeastern Syria. France 24's Clovis Cassady tells us more about the message lawmakers are sending.
It was a rare show of unity at the National Assembly, with all members of parliament present here voting in favour of the resolution. The resolution calling for an immediate end to the violence and also expressing the support of the French nation towards the Kurdish people. Some MPs said France needed to decide on financial sanctions against Turkey. Other MPs saying that the operations in northeastern Syria amounted to ethnic cleansing. The French Foreign Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian addressed the Assembly saying that France was in contact still today with the SDF forces made up of the YPG Kurdish fighters and Arab fighters. Jean-Yves Le Drian said, "We owe them after what they did fighting the Islamic State organization."
Well, hundreds of people continued to protest across multiple Lebanese cities on Wednesday night. For many, the resignation of Prime Minister Saad Hariri was a victory for the 2-week-long protest movement, but it was still only just a start. And it might not be the end for Hariri. President Michel Aoun formally asked him to continue in a caretaker role until a new cabinet is formed, and there are no clear replacements for him. Sanam Chantier has the story.
Waving the national flag, chanting anti-government slogans, protesters poured back onto streets and squares across Lebanon in the late hours of Wednesday. The military keeping a close eye on their every move. This after hearing reports that Saad Hariri is ready to return as prime minister only a day after he announced his resignation.
I am against the formation of a government by Saad Hariri because we consider him to have had a hand in corruption.
According to sources close to Hariri, he has set out conditions for a comeback, that the new government must include technocrats. A small number who took to the streets of the capital embraced the news.
Hariri represents a large portion of Lebanese society. And I personally have no problem if he stays on with a technocratic government that will represent the people. A government that is civilian and non-sectarian.
Earlier in the day, a sense of normalcy was beginning to return to the streets of the Lebanese capital after the army had asked demonstrators to clear all roads. For 2 weeks prior to this, the entire nation had come to a standstill in the most serious standoff in Beirut since 2008. Now the question lingers as to whether Hariri will officially reclaim his position or not. Either way, he has been asked to continue in a caretaker capacity.
Let's go to the United States next, where the House of Representatives is preparing to take its first official vote this Thursday on a resolution mapping out the next stages of the impeachment process against President Donald Trump. Now, part of that process includes public hearings. The latest to be invited for a voluntary interview is former National Security Advisor John Bolton. Now, he's refused to testify, however, without a subpoena. France 24's Katavan Gorgistani has the latest from Washington.
This is a big move for the Democrats in the House because, as they've called it, it's the new phase of this impeachment inquiry. There will be a vote. It is not a vote, however, and the Democrats insist on that. It's not a vote to authorize the impeachment inquiry. They say because they don't have a legal obligation to authorize that impeachment inquiry. It is a vote on formalizing the rules of procedure now that they're moving into that next phase. The next phase that will be mostly about having public hearings. We've had many of these meetings, hearings happening behind closed doors, and now the Democrats want to answer that criticism that they've been doing this in secret by putting this all out in public. The question now is the timeline. No one knows when those public hearings are going to start, and no one knows who the witnesses are going to be. There are some people who are starting to say that they might want to testify publicly. One of them is Bill Taylor, the top diplomat in Ukraine. He has reportedly said that he would be willing to come out in public. Another person that we might be seeing, that's because the Democrats want him to testify in public, that's Gordon Sondland. He is the U.S. ambassador to the EU, and his testimony apparently has been widely contradicted by some of the other witnesses, especially Alexander Vindman, who testified yesterday. And so the Democrats would want to see if he has anything to add or to change about his testimony once he has to do it in public.
Well, in the run-up to the 2020 presidential election in the U.S., social media companies have been under increasing pressure to police misinformation online. On Wednesday, Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey announced his strategy for tackling the problem by banning all political advertising on Twitter starting November 22nd. Now, this strikes a sharp contrast with his rival Facebook, which continues to defend running paid political ads, even false ones, saying it's freedom of speech. More wildfires are spreading across Southern California, fanned by extraordinarily dry and strong winds. The blaze that's been dubbed the Easy Fire has quickly grown into the most consequential of the new fires. It prompted an estimated 7,000 homes to evacuate, narrowly bypassing the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. The National Weather Service in the U.S. issued an unprecedented extreme red flag warning for the wildfires in Los Angeles and Ventura counties, as firefighters are still struggling to contain them. Chile's president, Sebastián Piñera, has pulled out of hosting the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation and the UN Global Climate Gatherings, which were due to take place in Santiago over the next 2 months. He said he took the difficult decision because he needed to put the interests of Chileans first, amid nationwide unrest. Emerald Maxwell has more.
It's a blow for the reputation of a country long known as South America's economic success story. But with Chile's worst social crisis in decades showing little sign of abating, President Sebastián Piñera says the country is not in a position to hold two major international summits, the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in mid-November and the UN Global Climate Gathering in early December.
This has been a very difficult decision, a decision that causes us a lot of pain, because we perfectly understand the importance of APEC and the COP for Chile and for the world.
The president said he needed to focus on restoring public order and peace. Fresh clashes broke out between protesters and security forces after his announcement. Chileans are demanding greater economic equality and better public services, and Piñera's new raft of social measures and cabinet reshuffle have done little to placate them.
Our society needs a change. Piñera's government is going nowhere. It's done absolutely nothing.
I agree with the protests, but I reject the violence.
While many of the demonstrations over the last 2 weeks have been peaceful, the unrest has left around 20 people dead. Large parts of Santiago are shut down after vandalism, and Chilean businesses have been hit with losses of around $1.4 billion. A special UN mission is expected in the country over the coming days to investigate alleged human rights abuses by security forces.
Well, finally, as another Brexit deadline is set to come and go this Thursday, and Britain's fate remains in limbo, an iconic figure that's been with us through it all says goodbye.
Order!
Now, that would be Speaker of the House of Commons John Bercow, who's stepping down on Thursday after 10 years in the government. The 56-year-old has found himself, and sometimes put himself, at the center of pivotal moments in the Brexit debate. That's made him a very divisive figure for many, including Prime Minister Boris Johnson, who paid the tennis lover Bercow a backhanded compliment on his last day.
Mr. Speaker, I know the whole House will want to join me in recording that after 10 tumultuous years, this is your last Prime Minister's questions. And as befits a distinguished former Wimbledon competitor, you have sat up there in your high chair, and not just as an umpire, ruthlessly adjudicating on the finer points of parliamentary procedure with your trademark Tony Montana skull, Mr. Speaker.
Thanks for watching. Stay with us on France 24.